Size, price, and time. Those are the three metrics that I judge a product's viability in order for it to be impulse purchase worthy. And this little guy meets all three of those metrics. Today we're going to be doing 4 different versions, 3 of which actually turn out, and we're going to be able to show you exactly how to make them and all the price points and everything in between to make these one trippers. Let's go to the shop. If you remember, I used quilted maple back in 2022 for this very large cutting board that I made, and it turned out absolutely fantastic. For anybody wondering, that handle has turned out great. It hasn't broken or cracked or anything like that, and I've used it multiple times at parties, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever made, and a lot of that had to do with the wood choice. And I wanted to touch on wood selection with this project in particular because there are a lot of dainty parts to it. A lot of things that somebody might look at and think, oh, that's going to break very easily. So a lot of that has to do with the material that you're using, because not all hardwood is created equal, and not all things that you're going to be using for this are created equal. Some of y'all might see this and think, oh, that's a really easy 3D printing project, and I think that you're completely correct. You can quickly and easily 3D print something like this, and it's going to serve the purpose just fine. Whereas if you take the extra time and make this out of wood, it's not only something that's serving a purpose, but it's something that looks nice too. One of the issues with this wood is it's got a twist in it, which means that it is not completely flat. Now, the normal person is going to go through and they're going to flatten the top and they're going to flatten the bottom, take away that material, make sure that everything is nice and flat, and then they're going to mill their project. Today, I'm not going to be doing any of that. I'm going to show y'all how I approach a piece of wood as it's twisted and how I can get pretty darn good results, but also the caveats that you have to think about along the way. So first and foremost, I'm going to be using double-sided tape all along the very bottom of this. And that's really important because I want to keep the material and the wasteboard in contact as much as possible. Once that's stuck down to the bed as well as I can get it, I'm going to go through and use my brad nailer, and I'm going to put a nail in every single corner. What that's going to do is not only going to flatten the board, quote unquote, a little bit, but it's also going to introduce a lot of stress into this wood. Right now, as it's sitting here, it doesn't have any type of stress. It's completely worry-free. As we're cutting things away, the wood is going to start releasing that tension or stress that's built up, and that's going to cause things to shift ever so slightly. This is going to be a very big impact if you have a very large piece that you're working on, and especially a lot of holes that you're putting into it, because every time that you're gouging the material, you're causing it just to release a little bit of that stress. This material in particular is 7/8 of an inch thick, whereas I normally would tell somebody to use 3/4 inch material with that, which obviously we could achieve by flattening everything and not dealing with the twist. But I know that there's a ton of value in being able to show mistakes along the way, and I know that not everybody's going to take the time to flatten their material, and certainly not everybody has the amount of tools in their shop to be able to properly flatten things before they get to the CNC machine. So this is a pretty quick and dirty way of going after this, and let's find out what the results are together. All right, so first and foremost, just to show y'all the branding capabilities of these, I'm going to be putting my logo on all 4 of these so that y'all can kind of follow along and maybe imagine where your brand or any type of customization might fit on these little one trippers. And then after that, we're going to be doing the main portion of things, which is just our downtown Jenny. I have things set up so that it is completely removing all of the material inside of the handles, and that's going to eat up a ton of time. You certainly do not have to do that, but it's something that I value because I'm not really going to have to go back in and mess with any types of tabs, and certainly nothing's going to be flying off of the machine. I specifically am doing that on here as well because I know that my material is going to be shifting a little bit, and I would rather it shift a lot while I'm doing this procedure than doing all the profile procedures. So once we are done pocketing out all of those and just removing that material completely, we can go through our profiling phase. Each one of these has 2 tabs on them, so it is hopefully going to keep everything as connected to the waste material as possible. And after we are done with this sequence, all we have to do is go through and cut all those tabs, and then we'll have our rough cut one trippers. Well, things went awesome except for the fact that I didn't cut all the way through the material, which would be a massive benefit if I was using a vacuum table or something like that and I didn't want to mar the surface. But in this case, I meant to cut all the way through. So I guess I did some measuring along the way, and there's a few different things that we could do. So the first and foremost would just be, if you've got the time, set your Z depth a little bit lower, and then just run the file again. I ate up a ton of time by pocketing out all these handle inserts, so that would be like another 22 minutes of me just standing around the shop, so I'm not particularly going to be doing that route. The other way would be to use a drill bit and just go through where you've already cut, pierce through the material, and since we're already going to be putting a round over on this, just using that router bearing, slip that through the opening that you just made, and then just zip all the way through, and it's going to release your part, and it's already going to be doing the round over. And then the last option that I just want to show y'all, because I think it should be easy enough, is to pop this entire part off, and then we're just going to be sanding off that material. Well, you know, every once in a while in the shop when you do something to save a little bit of time, you end up wasting a lot of time. Well, if you've watched the channel for a while, you're kind of used to that. I should have just lowered the Z and rerun everything. Instead of walking and finding my mallet, I just grabbed a hammer, and then one of them didn't make it. So we have our pieces. They're super janky right now, but the nice part is the router is going to clean all of these up. They're going to look great. So let's go ahead and clean everything up with the router and then talk about it a little bit. Well, it is time for our Mitz Street File of the Week. Mitz has sent over some mystery G-code as always, and he told me to put in a groovy Jenny bit and let it ride. So I don't know what we're about to cut out. Mitz knows what we're about to cut out. Let's see. The really fun part about all this is like, Mitz can see all of the different files that we're looking to create because he's doing the majority of the work as far as like making sure that everything's prepared for everybody on CNC with me. And he has started to do things themed. So it says one trip only, and it's got a woman who's just crushing it, trying to get all of her groceries inside. I absolutely love this, and it's gotten me thinking so much about specifically July. I can't tell you more because there's a lot. July's coming. Thanks, Mitz. At the beginning of this, I talked about 3 things that I use as a metric to be able to identify if something is going to be impulse purchase worthy, and that is size, price, and time. Specifically, making these for markets is an easy thing to add to your booth. It's such a low price point, most people are going to view that and think, oh, well, I'll just go ahead and pick that up. Now, earlier in the video, I touched on how some people are going to view this as more of a 3D printing project, and they're not completely wrong. If you're purely making things for utility, there are easier and cheaper ways to be able to accomplish this project. But if you're making something to be able to sell, I would highly suggest making this out of wood, because if you put this next to plastic, somebody's going to view the wood one and actually want to purchase that one a little bit more because of the warmth of it. Your product speaks to people in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's just about the utility of the object, and another thing is just about the nostalgia and the usability of it. One of the wonderful things that you have going for you as a CNC machinist, especially a home hobbyist, is that you can play around with something like this and create designs that are specifically made to serve a specific group of people. I go into that in depth on my webinars on CNC with me, so I'm not going to dive into that right now, but all of that to say is this is a blank canvas that you can use to be able to serve the right people. This is something that anybody at a craft show could see hanging up on your tent with a bunch of these bags hanging underneath it and immediately know what it's for and immediately see the value to it. When you're using something like this could be made out of a piece of scrap wood, whereas our bigger designs are purely meant to be able to display some type of a customization, whether that is your own logo or any type of last name. It's a nice canvas to be able to laser engrave, or in our case, CNC engrave, something to be able to show off. I don't particularly think that this is more quote-unquote useful than the other ones, but I do know that it has more space to be able to brand. So when looking at these two in particular, the usability of these definitely goes for this one, but there also is an issue. This, you're going to really have to pay attention to grain direction and the type of material that you're using. So what we're making it out of and the size is really important. If you're using a very cheap wood, especially like a very splitty wood like a cherry, you're really going to need to pay attention to how the grain is running. Specifically on this quilted maple, the grain's running up and down, which is a very bad thing. That's a very easy place for this to snap apart. But quilted maple has a lot of cross grain, and there's a lot of strength and structure to this. So if I were to be batching this out specifically for a market to try and keep my product price as low as possible and paying attention to the material side of things, I probably would still go with a more expensive wood like a white oak or a walnut that has that much more tight grain, something that you can count on a whole lot more. All right, so the last metric that we're going to be talking on is time, and that's really important when looking at something like this, because when specifically I'm looking at impulse purchases and my area around me locally, I really want to keep these projects at 5 minutes and below. If that's confusing to you, it doesn't matter. That doesn't need to be a metric for you, but I chase a whole lot of optimization in my shop all the time. And after dancing around with this in Carveco Maker for quite some time, I can get either one of these versions under 2 minutes. Now, I spent a lot longer on that for this video because I was pocketing out these areas in this specific piece of wood just to kind of show how you release tension in wood. But if I'm going to be batching these out for any type of a market, I can get these down to 2 minutes a piece. The sanding is probably going to take longer than the machining time, and that's something that I would really pay attention to. And you can kind of get that down with your material size, but if I were to do the roundovers again, I probably would do a solid 1/4 inch roundover. I feel like that would just feel a whole lot better. I did spend a good amount of time at the sander just rounding over, full round over this entire top piece so that as you grab it, it feels really good in the hand, because if you're selling this locally and you're right in front of somebody, that's the first thing that they're going to do is fit it inside their hand and see how it actually feels. That's also something that I do want to touch on too, is we spent a good amount of time figuring out the exact size that this needed to be as well, because it's not too big and it's not too small. I feel like it's going to fit a ton of different people's hands, and it's not going to be some like massive piece of wood that you're having to carry around with you. You can quickly and easily throw this into a trunk or into the back of a truck or something like that and just have it off to the side for whenever you need it. And I think that there's a ton of value in being able to show a customer that very quickly and easily without having to explain an entire thing. Like I said a second ago, if I were to hook this up in my booth, I would have a ton of these bags. These bags right here are just like a bunch of things that I found inside the house. And I would have a few of these set up. There we go. And I would just have this hanging from the tent, just off in the corner. And maybe having a sign that's pointing towards it. It's another cool thing about having CNC machines. If you have a booth and you are setting up locally, definitely use your machine to go ahead and make some very customized signs that draws people in a whole lot closer. Sometimes when people are walking by, they might see some of the things that you have, but they're more likely to read something that you've written if you have a nice big sign out there. Now, if you look at these two and you do see the differences in the hooks, the reason that I made the smaller one is this is going to be compatible with a lot more wood types, and this one's going to be a little bit more usable. I've tried both of these out, and although the smaller one does work, the larger size has the ability to hold on to these bags a lot easier. Especially like right now, when it's got a lot of weight on it, it's perfectly fine. But the second that you might need to set that down, you might be losing some bags along the way. That's where I found that this design really shines, is because it's got a large arcing area so that it's got this big divot in it, and all those bags can just settle down, especially as you're setting them down. They're not going to just fall off as quickly. But like I said earlier, the grain direction is really important with this, because if you do put a lot of weight on it, there's a pretty high likelihood that this thing is going to snap. So I hope y'all enjoyed the One Tripper. If you are a member of CNC with me, these files are ready and available for you. Not only the SVG files, but also the DXF, as well as Carveco and Vectric format files that are ready to cut. And I have an entire toolpath tutorial to walk you through all the steps of what I did and go into the nitty-gritty details on what it actually takes to toolpath something like this. I promise it's incredibly easy. If you're not a member of CNC with me, go ahead and check it out at cncwithme.com. And if you are, I'll see you over there. Bye.